How to water indoor plants. Indoor plants, or houseplants, have different needs than plants grown outside. They rely on you for everything. Watering your indoor plants involves knowing what specific plants need, watering on their schedule, and frequently checking the soil. You can help your plants by potting them in pots that drain well and pots that are fitted to the plant's size. Healthy plants also require the right type of water and the proper amounts, but there are ways to help stabilize plants that have been overwatered. 1. Research your specific plant's needs. Not every type of houseplant has the same watering needs, so educate yourself on the plants you have or are thinking of buying. Don't assume that 1. Research your specific plant's needs. Not every type of houseplant has the same watering needs, so educate yourself on the plants you have or are thinking of buying. Don't assume that every plant wants 1 quart of water every 2 days because all of your plants won't thrive like that. Some may prefer to have their soil fairly dry most of the time, while others need it most. Some may need the soil to dry out in between waterings. Let the plant determine when you water it. Although it may be easiest to water on a set routine that you have decided, plants are not likely to thrive when watered this way. So rather than watering every 2 days, get a feel for how often your plant needs water. Check the soil consistently and learn how often it tends to dry out and water on that schedule. Even indoor plants tend to have a dormant stage during the winter, so it is likely it will not need to be watered as often during this time. Morning tends to be a good time to water your plants. Watering at night can cause your plants to develop diseases more easily because the plant does not have time to dry before the temperature cools. 3. Perform the finger test. Stick a finger in the soil up to your first knuckle and notice if the soil is moist enough. If your finger can't even enter the soil, it definitely needs to be watered. If you reach an inch or so deep but your finger is completely dry, it probably needs water. If the top, again, this is not a guarantee for every plant. But most of the time if the top portion of soil is dried out, the plant could use some more water. You can buy a moisture meter that sticks in the soil and tells you when the plant needs water, which might be helpful and save guesswork. 5. Learn the weight of your well-watered plant. You can test if your plant has enough water by lifting it after you have just watered it and noticing how heavy it feels. Lift it periodically, and when it doesn't feel heavy enough, you'll know it needs some water. It's more of an art than a science, but this can be a good trick to master. This is only a good test for plants that are light enough to pick up and, if you have the strength to do so, it's not worth straining yourself just to check. Giving plants the water they need. 1. Pay attention to the type of water you use. You might assume that water from your faucet is just fine, but you may be wrong. City water can have chlorine and fluoride, which not all plants can handle. Soft water may have too much salt. Tap water may be too alkaline. If you use a certain water for a while and it doesn't seem to be keeping your plants healthy, it's probably time to switch. 2. Use room temperature water. After each watering, refill your watering container and let it sit until the next time you water. This way, the water can warm up to a standard temperature rather than whatever temperature would be from the tap or from rainwater. Most plants tend to prefer tepid water over cold water. If you have multiple plants and need a lot of water, consider keeping a few jugs or watering cans stored somewhere that you can keep filled and ready for when you need them. 3. Pour water evenly across the surface of the soil. You want to err on the side of giving your plants less than enough water, because you can easily add a little more. Once you water plants too much, it is a lot of work to fix it. Keep track of how much water you use from one time to the next so you can get an idea how much it is the right amount. Some plants can also benefit from misting the leaves, since watering mainly affects the roots. It is important to know your plant, however. Some leaves actually won't benefit from misting, and some plants may even be harmed from getting their leaves wet. 4. Correct overwatering. If you do overwater your plant, and it isn't draining, you can do a couple things to help stabilize it. Gently tip the pot on its side, and allow the excess water to drain out for a while. Or place paper towels on the surface of the soil and let them absorb some of the water. If it becomes a real problem, consider repotting in a new container that has better drainage. Try moving the pot to a warmer location so that it will dry more quickly. Avoid watering the plant for a while. Wait until the soil has dried out again. Using appropriate containers. 1. Pot plants in properly sized containers. Plants should be matched to a container of the right size to ensure that water is distributed efficiently. Plants in containers that are too small can become root-bound, meaning the roots take up all the space. Plants in containers that are too big may not hold water in the soil and so will become dried out. If you check the roots and you can tell there is more root than soil, this is a good indication that it's time to get a bigger pot. You only want to move plants up one pot size at a time so you don't end up with too much extra room. If the leaves of the plant seem disproportionate in size to the bottom, you should move up a pot size. If the pot has ever tipped over because of being top-heavy, this is a definite indication you need a bigger pot. If you check the roots and you can tell there is more root than soil, this is a good indication that it's time to get a bigger pot. You only want to move plants up one pot size at a time so you don't end up with too much extra room. If the leaves of the plant seem disproportionate in size to the bottom, you should move up a pot size. If the pot has ever tipped over because of being top-heavy, this is a definite indication you need a bigger pot. As with many aspects of tending indoor plants, there is no hard and fast rule that always applies. You need to occasionally take stock of your plant and judge if you feel a bigger pot would benefit it. 2. Place plants in a pot with drainage holes. Since overwatering is often what kills plants, pots that allow plants to drain are very important. These pots will either have a hole in the center of the bottom or may have some kind of thin slits on the bottom. Pots with a solid bottom can cause water to pool and the roots can rot if soaked for too long. If pots without drainage holes are your only option, it works well to put a layer of stones at the bottom of the pot. Extra water can pool there and won't be in direct contact with the soil and roots. The stone layer should be an inch or so deep. Be extra careful not to overwater your plants. If you can only find plastic pots without holes, you can drill your own holes into the bottom. 3. Place a drainage pan under the pot. If your pot is going to drain water, you most definitely don't want it draining out onto your floors. You can purchase plastic pans specifically for this, or you can improvise and use a plate or saucer. You could even cut up a milk jug or 2-liter bottle if the pot is small enough and you aren't overly concerned with the appearance of it. Always empty this drainage pan within a half hour or so after watering, rather than allowing the plant to sit in it. If you don't drain the pan, it's basically the same as having a pot with no holes, as the plant will still be soaking in too much water. 4. Repot when necessary. If you have had a plant for a while and you can tell it is growing bigger, it may be best to replant it in a bigger pot. If the soil of the plant has shrunk away from the edges, it may need a smaller pot. To check if a plant has become root-bound, you can carefully pull it out of the pot and check if there is still plenty of soil, or if it seems to be mostly roots.